Hi, I'm Adam Kunzmiller here with RPG Geek at Gen Con 2013, and I'm here with Rob Hainso, and we are looking at 13th Age, published by Pelgrane Press. So, Rob, tell us about this.
Yeah, this is a D20 rolling fantasy game with some indie-style storytelling mechanics added. And the birth of the game is that my best friend Jonathan Tweet was lead designer of 3rd edition, and I played in his 3rd edition playtest game. And then I was lead designer of 4th edition.
Okay.
He was in my 4th edition playtest game. So we've played together on our what I call our Wednesday night men's group for, sadly, no women players in that particular group. But perhaps it's a matter of taste in the case of the women, since it's kind of a wild group. And our group, Jonathan and I, after working together at Wizards for years, we wanted once again to go ahead and work together. And the question mark was, well, what are we going to do? And it seemed like a pretty clear answer. We're going to design the game that we want our Wednesday night group to play. Mm-hmm. And we knew, well, look, the Wednesday night group is not heavily into superheroes. They're not heavily into espionage. What they actually like, they like dungeon crawling, fantasy, and so all right, well, let's do that, since mm-hmm. both of us understand how to do that really well.
Sure.
So what we did is we created what I would call a simpler, streamlined version of the familiar traditional D20 mechanics. So players who know how to play any other versions, 80% of the game, you're going to kind of know how to go ahead and play things. Things that are different and easier are, there is no grid. You're not counting movement. It's a very simple flowing system of, are you nearby, are you far away, or are you actually engaged in the combat? And with very simple little rules for how to get around people and how to fight and how to attack people that are nearby or far away. The important part for the game, the very first thing that really Jonathan brought to the table was, we know that, if you're thinking about a fantasy world, pretty much every fantasy world, there is an archmage. Maybe there's a dwarf king, there's an elf queen. These figures that are really important, that are sort of in the background, or sometimes in the case of Forgotten Realms, well, they're pretty front and center.
Right.
Well, we realized, let's take those figures and let's use those archetypes and turn them into icons who are actually in the world. And then when you create a first level player character, you go ahead and choose relationships with those people.
With the different icons in the world.
Yes, so that right at the very start, I may have some sort of connection with the Emperor that gives, and what happens is that players are given a stake in the big, grand story of the world. And in other words, they don't start out sort of just as separate creatures. They start out, here for example is the Emperor of the world, Dragon Empire, and the Elf Queen. And the player, what will end up happening is there are game mechanics that after you've chosen a relationship with one of these people, every game session the game master is finding out, which icons are relevant to this session. And it's always going to be, almost always, icons that you have chosen some positive or negative or conflicted relationship with. Mm-hmm. So although the great powers are involved, they're involved because they're the ones that you as a character cared about.
Right.
I would say that one other thing, we've had a ton of fun, and it makes the game, I'm demoing the game, 2 or 3 times a day at Gen Con, 2-hour demos, but every single demo is really different, and every campaign is very different, because we ask players from the very start to tell us the one unique thing about their character. And as an example of this, last year at Gen Con, a man came and said, I am the only halfling acrobat to ever escape from the Diabolus Circus of Hell. Now, the Diabolus, we'll find a picture of her here in a minute as I'm talking, but it's I had never known that there she is. I had never known that there was a Circus of Hell. But now the player has all of a sudden told me...
He's done some world building for you.
He's done world building, and now I know that this demo game, in fact, and certainly the rest of the campaign, is going to intersect with a Diabolist and with a circus, and he was able to go ahead and, after you've determined your one unique thing, I ask you, okay, so now that we know your one unique thing, tell me a little bit about who your character has been. What have your careers been? What have you been doing for a long time? What have you studied? This person could just write down, well, circus acrobat in hell.
Sure.
And every time, we don't use a full skill system like other D20 games.
Right.
We say, that's a background. You get 8 points to put in your backgrounds. He put 4 points into, well, actually he put 5, the max, into that circus acrobat in hell. And every time that he makes
An escape artist.
An escape artist. Well, if he was going to make an escape artist check, I'd say, well, it's not, escape artist isn't a skill. You're just trying to escape from these bonds. And it's a dex check, so you're going to add your level and your dex mod. And then I say, do you have a background that's going to help you? This guy says, I'm a circus acrobat from hell. And it's like, okay, add all 5 points in that background to the skill check. Whereas the guy who said, I'm a bodyguard, I'm a chef to the Elf Queen, and I am a military commander on the seawall fighting Godzilla-sized monsters, I look at him and say, you know, you're not actually getting any background
None
bonus
of that sounds
to
very
get
relevant
out of the escape
to,
artist check, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times here in demos, what I do is I actually find a way to say, the guy who's a sergeant commander of troops, and it's like trying to get a crying baby to stop crying before basically the monsters hear them. I'm like, what background are you using? He's like, he looks at his, commands an Imperial regiment, you know? And I'm like, okay, now listen. And I'm like,
You will be quiet, mister.
and I'm like, you know, as a commander of an Imperial regiment, you have kissed a few babies in garrison posts, and I will give you 2 points out of that 4-point background. That's okay. You know, and the player all of a sudden feels like, oh yeah, all right, I can get that. Now the really great thing that happens therefore is whenever there's a skill check being done, players are thinking about who they really are in the world, and with that commander, I'm able to say, but I want you to tell me how you use your commander Imperial Regiment skill to quiet the baby. And if the commander says, if he had said,
I dressed down the baby and intimidated into being quiet.
I would say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to roll this without using your background because you chose the wrong path. But if he said, I've comforted many soldiers who were terrified by the fears of battle, I'd say, you know what, that's so good, I'm going to give you all 4 points. And then what ends up really happening in play is that players create ideas that other characters then riff on later in the session, or that become tropes for an entire campaign. Like if that had been a total campaign, you can bet that whenever the player characters are around a baby, they're going to be turning to the Imperial commander and say, well, I think you've got this, you know? And so what's happened is that a simple skill check, quote, skill check, which we call it a skill check, but it actually has now become part of the character's personal backstory.
Sure.
So that's an example of how the actual mechanics of this game, we tried to find interesting ways to take D20 mechanics and turn them into storytelling tricks.
Sure. I think to highlight that, we can look at the character sheet and you see your standard D20 kind of, here are your attributes here, but you don't see a giant skill matrix.
There is no skill matrix.
You know, you just have backgrounds, icon relationships.
Yep.
And we have this, you had this chart in here of how the different icons relate to each other and how they interact with each other.
You know, this is funny. We know there's a lot of people who think in terms of the 3x3 grid.
Yep.
And although neither Jonathan nor I in our home game use much about lawful good or neutral good or stuff, we still have it somewhere in the framework of our brain.
Still ingrained in there.
Still somewhere there, right? So this is sort of our default statement. We think that the Great Gold Worm, who has sealed the abyss against the forces of chaos and demons, we think he's probably lawful good. We think that his enemy, the Diabolist, is pretty chaotic evil. But as you can see, it's Stray in this diagram that Lee Moyer, the artist, created. It strays up here. She could be chaotic neutral, just a little bit. And this blurred line here means Prince of Shadows, the guy who steals everything and no one even remembers his existence sometimes. He probably here, but maybe he strays like this. Now, individual campaigns, what's really important for us, we sort of half-designed this world.
Okay.
This is not written in the same style that an awful lot of source books are. I mean, a lot of my favorite game worlds, you know, Glorantha, Forgotten Realms, they're really very, very, very detailed about look, this is here, this is there. When I came to, here's a mountain called Starport. When you look, and by the way, everything is in this book, the geography, monster chapter. When you look at the entry for Starport in here, I will now make my alphabetical order check. Starport. Starport reaches all the way up to the overworld. Stars dock there for rest and refitting. Details available on site. I feel that we've done interesting things here that have just enough information that the game masters and the players can go ahead and drive them in whatever direction they want. If we ever publish, quote, a version of Starport, we'll publish 5 versions, very shorter in each of them, talking about if your campaign is really, really high fantasy and you want stars to actually be like gods, this is how you should do it. If stars are ships, this is how you should do it. If stars are flying realms, this is how you should do it.
So you're actively encouraging your players to create their own worlds as they see fit, and then you're trying to support that as best you can when you release more materials.
Well, in a certain sense, we did write this book. The tone of the book and its intent is to be talking to experienced gamers.
Okay.
What's missing here? The paragraph that says, "Is this your first role-playing game?"
Sure.
I did not feel like being. Look, I'm sarcastic, but I did not feel like being. Is this your first role-playing game? Find some other game.
Right.
No. Now, the truth is that there are people. Sam Wood, one of the original D&D artists, has made me really happy because he's been writing wonderful things about the game. But his player character group includes, I think, 4, 6 to 10-year-olds. Mm-hmm. It's their first role-playing game.
Right.
And the one unique thing, like the one kid is like, I speak to birds. And it's like,
that's awesome.
And he's like, oh, this is awesome. Now I can just like have a bird fly up and give you guys information.
Yeah.
Yes, you are the game master's friend. And the kids are able to like go ahead and just do the thing that's like, well, this is what I want my character to be, and the game master doesn't have to say, no.
Right.
It's therefore a perfectly fine game for first-time players. Mm-hmm. It probably requires a game master
knowledgeable
who has some
GM.
experience, because there are, in the Wizards spell list, for instance, not spell list, every character gets to choose 3 talents. One of the Wizard's talents is Vance's polysyllabic verbalization.
I noticed that earlier. I was curious what that was.
If I cast a fireball, and as I cast it, I say, igniting sphere of incendiary incandescence. No, that's a terrible version. But what I just
how
said,
about Klaatu Verata?
Yeah, okay, that's right. What I will be doing with that is I say, look, actually, Game Master, what I want to do is I want this fireball to have a bit of a fiery sphere left over. I just want an extra effect. Yes, the fireball goes off, but also there's this fiery sphere. And because the wizard used it in the description of the spell, and usually you're supposed to alliterate. I kind of blew it. Dear Internet, I am heartily sorry. I was not up on my spellcasting. Then I get to, as game master, I can say, yeah, that sounds right. You did get that extra little effect. But it requires a bit of improv in many cases. We want that freedom to like go ahead and add things that other people can then riff on, even in combat.
Well, and I noticed that in here you have, do you call them classes in here?
We do.
So the classes that you have speak to a lot of things that gamers will be familiar with, but have that twist on them. So like your spellcaster doesn't have a list of spells necessarily. He has this polysyllabic thing that he can do.
Well, he actually does have a list of spells,
okay,
but then he can modify them. He gets to like, the example is, instead of just casting sleep, when he casts a spell, he doesn't say sleep, he calls it the dread slumbers of Dormanja, and then he gets the extra effect that he describes as it relates to the spell. So that's an example. One thing, I did a lot of class design in 4E, but one thing that was sort of late to the party was that look, if enough people complain that many classes feel familiar, or, I'm sorry, too much alike, too similar.
Sure.
If enough people complain about it, well, they're telling you the truth. That's their experience. They think they're too similar.
Sure.
Right. Fine. You don't get to say no, but they're really different. No, you don't get to say that. They're actually too similar. And it kind of drove me nuts that they were too similar. So one of my giant goals doing this was that the fighter would not feel like a wizard. The fighter wouldn't even feel like a ranger.
Right.
The sorcerer is a spellcaster, but the sorcerer can.
People want to see more.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Keep going. I'll flip through.
Okay, flip through towards the sorcerer even. The sorcerer could go ahead and gather energy, gather power and then they could go ahead and cast spells at double strength the next turn. The wizard just doesn't get to do that. It doesn't happen. And the sorcerer has breath weapon spells, where when they cast it, just like a dragon, the rest of the encounter, they might be able to cast that spell again. Wizard doesn't happen that way for them. The monk that's coming out in the next book, 13 True Ways, actually uses powers that are an opening attack, the first part of a form, a flow move, much more powerful, the second part, and then a finishing attack, which is the third part. And they're structured each, like if I learn the Claws of the Panther style, there'll be an opening, a flow, and a finishing, but I don't have to use them in order. I can mix and match from all my different forms. End result is that it reads out as a haiku when you're done, which is a
Very
great
cool.
note. But let me tell you, there's never going to be another class that uses a haiku attack, right? It's just not going to happen.
Got a chat question.
Yeah.
Do you come from a 4th edition background?
What?
You come from writing 4th edition background?
I was working on 3rd edition, like Forgotten Realms campaign setting, and doing miniatures games at the time, and I was on the 3rd edition team, but then lead designer on 4E. Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like you went to more of a role-playing style game versus like a tactical combat.
Yeah, not as much simulation,
Can you talk
more
about that a little
narrative.
bit?
Oh, sure.
And then
You know,
what-
in fact, funny part is, it's like Jonathan and I,
Restate what I was
So the question was, coming from a 4th edition background, it looks like one of your goals with this game was to get away from kind of the intense, crunchy simulation experience and more of the narrative role-play experience.
absolutely. I mean, the thing is that Jonathan and I designed the game we want to play, which is that, actually, whatever it's been 3rd edition or 4th edition, we have twisted the game towards the storytelling style when we run it. However, this time we're like, okay, since that's what we do, let's make
the
sure
system
that
support
the
that.
system supports it instead
Right.
of being, and now how do I figure out how to to get that in? Let's spend the time. The introduction has a 4-paragraph section on, hey, so the designers worked at 340, how does this compare? And it's our acknowledgement that, like, look, we both learned an awful lot from each other's games and from the work we did on them together, but this is the game we want to play together now, and it is using mechanics that actually drive storytelling much more obviously, much more as part of it.
So would you say if there were people who enjoyed the D20 systems but wish that they could just live in the world more and get away from the book some, like this is...
Well, yeah, this is
is a
definitely
good fit for them.
This is a good fit for them. I've had the weird situation so far that groups that have been split between I'm crunchy, hardcore, I want to have all the bonuses gamers, and story gamers have been writing us during playtesting and afterwards and saying, the weird thing is, we can agree on this game. There's enough crunchy options for characters, round by round choices of what to do, but it's connected to the story, so the story players who usually don't want to have to make those decisions, they're really psyched about it because actually, no, they're getting to to tell the story while they're doing it. Meanwhile, the guys who've never ever narrated an attack, are without even necessarily being asked in some cases going, okay, well, this is how I do it. And this is what it looks like, and they're just and that's our goal. Our goal is, to make people, help people describe things so that then even combat becomes richer by the end of it. And,
Very cool.
Yep.
And we have a nice little promo here that we want to just take a brief moment to show off. And Lincoln, could you zoom in on this? So this is a spinner ring. Who makes these again? The Crit Success. They had a big Kickstarter on these. And each of the faces is one of the icons that he mentioned earlier. And,
yes, and so that's like Lich King has got the symbol of like a stake and a cross.
Let's get this out. So Rob told me before we started that if I spun this ring,
you have to ask the question and spin the ring.
I have to ask the question and then spin the ring, and he will answer in the form of whatever icon it lands on. So do we have a question from the chat here?
We'll see in a second. Takes a second.
Oh, that's right.
That's funny.
I'll let you know what you're going to be saying so you can prepare.
I haven't actually looked over at that yet, so now it's my first time. So, who's it going to be? Oh, the priestess? Oh, that's easy. All right, excellent.
Well, maybe I should spin again.
Well, actually, you should spin it twice, and then I'll answer in 2 styles.
So we got the priestess and the axes.
Oh my God, Orc Lord.
The Orc Lord?
Orc Lord.
So I'll go ahead and ask a question while we're waiting for them.
Sure.
Um,
Or you could ask.
They're not serious.
All right, yeah.
So we'll go with one I always ask anyways.
Right.
When is this available and what other supplements are coming out?
Okay.
Priestess first.
Priestess first. Even so, as you hold it in your hand, it can be reached everywhere and brought and shared with those who have not been fortunate enough to read the words. Look into yourself, find it if you have it in yourself, to go to the Pelgrane booth, buy 3 and get 1 free. So that your entire
That's
group.
quite the deal, Priestess.
Your entire group. Okay. Meanwhile, the Orc Lord says.
The Orc Lord is one. We're wondering about the Orc Lord.
Next product.
What are the next items?
Yeah, are there any expansions?
Yeah, any expansions on the way?
Okay.
Orc Lord.
The Orc Lord is going to speak about me as in the third person. When the puny human returns home and spends 10 days working, if he has not put the bestiary on the Pelgrane site for pre-order, my axe shall cleave his puny head.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
So the bestiary is coming.
Very good. Very good.
Better wrap it up.
Yeah. So that was.
Please don't make me top that.
That was Rob with Fire Opal talking about 13th Age, which is being published by Pelgrane.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That was great.
That's good.